How's it going, everybody? This is Cameron White with White Light Astrology, and welcome back to your favorite weekly horoscope. What the fuck is going on in the universe for July 29th through August 5th of 2019? Thank you guys so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing and continually supporting me. I appreciate and love every single one of you guys. This week is actually looking pretty calm for the most part, and I think that this is going to allow us to feel a lot more productive and a lot more clear with what we're doing, because there's not a lot of planetary action going on besides the new moon in Leo and Mercury stationing direct. And after what we've been experiencing for the past couple of weeks, this is definitely our chance to grasp or, catch our breath and to, relax for a second and to take a couple of deep breaths and to kind of go into not necessarily something new, but kind of going about what we have been going about, but in a new way and with a new sense of, passion, with a new sense of emotion and a new sense of meaning and reason behind it. As we end July off with the new moon in Leo, I think that this is going to give us that opportunity to really look at ourselves and really look at what's the meaning and what's my purpose, what is my why as to what I'm doing things. And then as we start August off on the next day with Mercury stationing direct, I think that this is giving us the clarity of mind that we've needed and figuring out what is worth nurturing, what is worth protecting, and what is worth, growing and giving, empathy and, trust and care to. I think that this is going to give us the kind of spring in our step that we need to move forward, and that's going to help us as we move forward, because things are starting to look a little bit better. But in order to enjoy what good is going to come, we have to be able and be ready to accept that. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the horoscope. So starting today off on Monday, on July 29th, we're going to be having the moon enter Cancer, and that's really about it. But as we leave the moon in Gemini, where, our outside world was, kind of like giving us a lot of information while we internalize a lot of new questions and a lot of new thoughts, the moon goes into Cancer, where this is about focusing on, okay, what's important about this? Where do I need to protect? What do I need to nurture? What do I need to defend? And while the moon goes into Cancer, I think that this is giving us that time to be a little bit more vulnerable with how do we feel about things? What is worth protecting? What is worth nurturing? What is worth, fully encompassing your emotions into and involving yourself into those things? And even though this is just the moon going into Cancer, we experience this all the time, I think that this is going to be important as we're getting, this is right before we have the new moon in Leo, so this is giving us an opportunity to really reflect on what really matters in the situation. And then on Tuesday, on July 30th, that's when the moon will start to apply to an opposition with Saturn and start to conjoin Mercury. And while the moon's opposing Saturn, this should be super easy to understand. This is Saturn in Capricorn, retrograde on the south node. There's a lot of blocks being imposed. There's a lot of limitations and a lot of restriction. There's a lot of walls and barriers being involved. And while the moon's going through Cancer, again, this is kind of a time where it's not necessarily about taking over the walls and, having them crumble. I think it's about going, hey, if this is the resistance and this is the opposition that we're experiencing, where do we need to put our focus on first? And while the moon conjoins Mercury, I think this is giving us a little bit more clear thought of like, hey, how do we feel about situations? How do we feel about this opposition and this, barrier that's kind of separating us from what we're trying to achieve, or at least what we're trying to get handled so we can go on to what we want to achieve? And while the moon is opposing Saturn, this is going to be a little bit of a difficult time to kind of be like, see the light at the end of the tunnel. But as the moon conjoins Mercury, you have to remember Mercury is getting really close to stationing direct. It's basically motionless at this point. And while Mercury is motionless here in Cancer, it's really, looking through the chemicals or like the concoction of emotions that it has, and it's kind of wanting to think about things and wanting to dissect them a little bit and try to understand more of what it's actually feeling so it can express that. And I bring this up because while the moon is conjoining Mercury, even though that there's this opposition with Saturn, I think it is going to be really important to, even though you may not have everything clear and everything exactly the way you want it, it's still important to express, whether that's verbally through, through your words or through, written or communication, however it is that you express how you feel and express what exactly you need to say. And expressing what you need to say is going to be important too as we move into Wednesday on July 31st, when we have the new moon in Leo. Now, while the moon enters Leo, basically just as then starts the new moon, and at this time, this new moon is going to be conjoining Venus in Leo. Yeah, Venus is under the beams of the sun right now. She's kind of like, we don't really see what's going on, and that's okay. However, while Venus is in Leo, this is important to understand because while Venus is this planet of love and value, she's wanting you to connect, she's wanting to indulge and express. She's an aversion to the node. She's an aversion to, Saturn. She's coming up to a trine with Jupiter here eventually. I like to look at this new moon in Leo as an opportunity to really give ourselves the positive encouragement and the self-love and the identifying with what our passions are, with what our whys are, with why we're going into things, because we're going to need it as we start to move forward. Life isn't always easy, and I like to look at this as an opportunity to be like, hey, life's not easy, but at least we can enjoy this one moment right now, and this one moment of joy is actually going to give us a lot more fuel than we expected as we move forward. But while this new moon is conjoining Venus, this is a good time to really give yourself that, pep up, that, hey, or that self-encouragement is what I'm trying to say. And with this new moon in Leo, it's kind of like this is a new moon. This is the first, lunation in Leo that we've had that wasn't on an eclipse, because as you guys remember, when we had the total lunar eclipse in January, it was technically in Leo. And now having this new moon, this lunation in Leo without the eclipse being involved, I think is bringing a lot more subtle, a lot more peaceful tone to things. And so during this time, this is a good time to reset your batteries, reset your intentions, all of that new moon stuff that you guys read about. It's important to understand the main theme of level yourself out and kind of check yourself for a second. Not necessarily start and initiate things. Maybe if you want to, that's fine. But it's more of give yourself a break, look at where you are, and then move forward. And while this is in Leo, this is about going hey, what am I capable of? What is in integrity? What is worth making a statement for? What is worth being dramatic about? Why are we doing these things? And I like to hit on that. What is your why statement? Why are you doing the things that you're doing? And I think this new moon in Leo is a good time to reflect on your why. Then on Thursday, on August 1st, that's when we have Mercury finally stationing direct. And while the moon was conjoining Mercury on Tuesday, and it was important to kind of think about all this stuff, communicate it, while Mercury goes direct, this is when our mindset, our thoughts, our actual line of communication can start to become a little bit more clear. It can become a lot more better, and we can start to overcome all of the problems that Mercury retrograde kind of brought to us. So this is exciting. Also on Thursday, we are going to be having the moon conjoining Mars and starting to apply to a trine with Jupiter. And this is important because as the moon's in Leo, it's really, it's happy. The moon in Leo wants to be prideful, have meaning, have reason, and all of this other grand stuff. While it's conjoining Mars, it has the ability to do that. Mars in Leo will act it out for sure. And it's trining Jupiter here too. So Jupiter's kind of I'm trying to make some room for you, but he's retrograde, so it's not necessarily too much, support. But I want to bring this up because while Mercury is stationing direct, it's really important to not get overwhelmed and to not be reactionary to, anything that gets said or anything that gets addressed. It's important to not necessarily react but to respond. Take the time that you need to really think about what's going to be more important for you, what's going to be right for you. And it's not necessarily to say this is all about you at this moment, but it's about what is right, what is morally correct as far as your standards go. What are you willing to get involved with? However, while the moon's conjoining Mars, it could be really easy to attack. It can be really easy to fight with the tongue, and it's important to not react and to respond. Then on Friday, on August 2nd, that is when we have the moon enter Virgo, where after it gets out of Leo and we felt our meaning, we felt our why, it's time to write it out symbolically. Moon in Virgo is kind of being able to see how we feel, detail it down, write it all out and be specific, but it can be easy to get kind of analysis paralysis over all of the problems that are kind of being involved in everything that you can see and all the information that you have. But while the moon goes into Virgo, it's important to understand that, if you want to convey your emotions, know how to speak them, know how to address them. And it's also going to be important to keep yourself busy in the mercurial sense of hey, now that we have this meaning, we have this why, this new moon in Leo kind of pumped us up. It's time to execute that. The moon in Virgo, clean your living space, organize your shit, get your stuff together. That's the best way to look at it. And that's going to be a really good way to combat, any type of anxieties or stress that you may have during that transit. But also on Friday is when we have Venus square Uranus. And I didn't bring this up as a highlight because I really don't think it's that important, but I bring it up because while Venus is in Leo, looking for the attention, looking for the pride, being, herself and having fun, as she squares Uranus in her home sign, you have to remember that Uranus is, revolutionary. Uranus is changing things up. And when it's in the sign of Taurus, when we're talking about what brings security, what brings stability, what brings value, what do we really want to, why are we actually doing things? What do we have sentimental value in? And as Uranus is changing that, Venus squaring Uranus, it's kind of like the way that we're seeking that. It could be validation, it could be attention, could be pride, love, being in the spotlight, whatever Venus and Leo wants. It's not the traditional sense. This is something new, and this is something that you have to understand that, it's not just about being in the spotlight or getting the attention. It's about having that heart-to-heart of understanding of, I actually encourage you. This is actually how I feel, and I want to embrace this feeling. And it's important to remember, while Venus is in Leo, you don't have to do everything traditionally. Break the ground with this. This is what Uranus and Taurus is all about. And I bring this up because you may be feeling, extra whatever and throwing your caution to the wind. That's fine. Do whatever you want to do. But while Venus is squaring Uranus, don't be afraid to look at different circumstances. Don't be afraid to look at different opportunities or different decisions that you can take, because this is a new way of being. Then on Saturday, on August 3rd, that is when we have the moon start to oppose Neptune, trine Saturn, square Jupiter. And I bring this up because, it's the transit. It's the only thing that's going on, duh. But it's not necessarily the biggest thing, but what I've been noticing as the moon's in Virgo, opposing Neptune, trining Saturn, squaring Jupiter, it's kind of being able to see past the illusion, not getting yourself over hyper over, what can be, but being able to apply yourself in a very strict and disciplined way that's going to help you see a little bit more clear of a reality than just, trying your best to live a dream. It's about taking the action steps necessary to make your dream into a reality, because that stuff isn't overnight. It takes progression. It takes you doing one thing at a time that brings that closer to your reality to make that even more into your reality. So what I see on Saturday is a lot of progressiveness, a lot of, bursting bubbles, but seeing things in a way that can actually create results. Then on Sunday, on August 4th, we have the moon entering Libra, and not a whole lot is going on Sunday. And while the moon's in Libra, this is just balance. This is just a balancing act. It's just about going, hey, now that I'm starting to see what I'm doing is, not necessarily is this what I need to be doing or is this more worth it? It can be easy to be indecisive with the moon in Libra, but what I do think is more important is putting more grace and elegance and more of a finer tune to things. How can we really balance things out to where, you're not just giving your all on this, but you can, put direct your energy here, direct your energy there, and not be able to, not, overwork yourself or, have that analysis paralysis. How can we make things simpler? How can we make things more easygoing and more, workable for everybody? Then as we start next week off on August 5th on Monday, that's when the moon is going to come to a square with Saturn while it's in Libra and start to sextile Jupiter, Mars, and Venus. And I think this is going to be important because while the moon's in Libra squaring Saturn, it's kind of it's hard to make this easy. It's hard to balance everything out the way that we need it to. But while it's sextiling Jupiter and sextiling Mars and Venus, how can we be creative and almost lucrative around the way that we can delegate this? How can we be a little bit more, optimistic and being able to look forward into things, not necessarily being a Debbie Downer, but being hey, I see this problem. There can be a solution as long as you're open to the idea that there is one. And I think as we start next week off with that, I think this is going to give us a little bit of leverage and a little bit more of a foresight as to what we need to do right now in order to have the results that we want as we look forward. And that's this week, guys. As we get into next week, that is when we're going to have the Sun trine Jupiter. And this is important because the trine is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter stations retrograde and direct when the Sun trines Jupiter. And no, when the Sun trines Jupiter, Jupiter won't be stationing direct. That will be a couple days later. Yes, Jupiter is stationing direct next week, which is also positive. But I bring up this idea because it's kind of while Jupiter was in Sagittarius and creating all of this philosophical and, positive room for us to believe that there's, room for us to expand and areas for us to go, Jupiter's been retrograde where it's been it can't just be all in your head. You have to believe all of this stuff in order to start really seeing the results of it. And as the Sun trines Jupiter and Jupiter stations direct, this is really about going, if you believe that this can happen, you have the ability to grow into that space. Then also next week we have Mercury finally going back into Leo, where this can be a little bit more fun, not so sensitive, a little bit more outbursty, which we'll talk more about, being able to handle what we're saying and not be so snappy with Mercury and Leo as we get into next week. But with that being said, thank you guys so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys, and I'll be seeing you next week.